We're on the first text of chapter 6. Anashrita karma palam karyam karma karoti yaha. Yaha, one who, karoti karma karyam. This is a alliteration. Just like in English, you use alliteration. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. That kind of stuff, that's alliteration, where you use similar sounding words, letters in a word, and it's poetic. So, karyam karma karoti yaha. This is you have verbal roots in a language, like for instance, spear, S-P-I-R. In English, it's where you get the word spirit from. It's also where you get the word respiration from. S-P-I-R. And or spec, S-P-E-C, spectacle, spectator, etc. So spec, to see, and spear, to breathe. Spirit means that you're breathing. That's the etymology of the word. And then it came to mean ghosts and goblins and things like that. And then eventually came to mean transcendental or non-material. But anyway, you look at words like that and you look for the verbal roots, and they tells you something about what the word originally meant. Or even what the word means now. So anyway, Sanskrit has verbal roots too, and so Kri is a verbal root. It's a big verbal root. So where, like namaskar, that kar and namaskar, that's from Kri. Karma, from Kri also. It's a big one. To do. Kri means to do. So it's a pretty big, to be, to do. There's a few big verbs in a language. To be is a big one. I am, they are, she is, he is. It's a big one. To be. To do. Another huge one. Hacer in Spanish. It's the infinitive, to do. So anyway, that's the verbal root here, Kri. So yaha, one who, karoti, he does. Karma, action. Karyam. This is a gerundiv. It's that is to be done. He does action which is to be performed. He does action which is meant to be done. So karyam karma karoti yaha. And what's interesting is not only is there alliteration in the sense that there's a repetition of the kr, but in addition to that, there's also the same verbal root is used. You follow? That's a big deal. Do me a favor. Tell me he's going to stop. Thank you. So you got here both ornament, both a form of poeticism based on alliteration, based on repeating certain sounds. Karyam, karma, karoti. Kar. But then also, the meaning is, it's from the same root. Do deeds that need to be done, like that, right? Do doings that need to be done, like that. That would be, the equivalent. But that sounds weird. Do doings that need to be done. Doesn't roll off the tongue, but this one rolls off the tongue. Karyam, karma, karoti yaha. One who does action that needs to be done. Anashrita karma palam. Without becoming enmeshed in karma pal. Karma pal means the fruit of karma. without getting enmeshed in, or without taking shelter of, or without trying to enjoy. Anashrita can also mean without taking shelter of. But if you take shelter of the fruits of your labor, just think about it. If you take shelter of the fruits of your labor, how do you take shelter of the fruits of your labor?
You become addicted to the results.
You enjoy them. Then you become addicted to them. The enjoyment comes first. Think about it. Do you follow this? So you enjoy them. So it says without taking shelter of the fruits, but what it means is it means without trying to enjoy them. Without trying to enjoy the fruits of your work. If you do what needs to be done. If someone does those things which need to be done without getting attached to the fruits. Sasannyasi. He's a sannyasi. Cha yogi cha. And a yogi. Na nir agnir. Na cha akriyaha. Not someone who is without fire and without ritual. Kriya is actually from the same root. It means action. But the word kriya is specifically used oftentimes to mean ritual. It could be duty here. It could be one who has no duty. One who is without fire. What does that mean, without fire? Nir Agni means one who is without fire. What does that mean? One who's without fire. You should be able to answer this. You're all going to feel foolish. Not you, but you will. Yeah.
One who doesn't perform sacrifices.
Boom. Fire's a big deal in the Vedic culture, right? Fire's a big deal in every culture. So we could go the generic route, one who doesn't cook their food, or one who doesn't heat their water, or you could go that route for any culture. But the Vedic culture, when you hear fire being mentioned in a philosophical text, immediately your mind should go to the Vedic fire sacrifice. So, not one who lights no fire, who doesn't kindle the sacred fire, who doesn't engage in Vedic ritual sacrifice. Somebody can think, I'm a sannyasi, I'm a renunciate, so I'm going to renounce engaging in Vedic ritual sacrifice. So you could not do the act of the sacrifice, but you could still be attached in your mind. You could be detached in terms of your, doing your duty. You could be detached in terms of working. But still, in your heart, you could be attached, like someone who's in prison. They're not doing anything wrong, but they will do something wrong in due course of time. A lot of times when you meet people, they put on their best face when they meet you. And maybe you see some little chinks in the armor. But you think, give them the benefit of the doubt. But then in due course of time, those chinks in the armor show more and more. Or maybe you meet somebody and you just saw them do some terrible thing, but you think, no, they're not going to do that same terrible thing to me. They will, due course of time. How people talk with you about others is how they're going to talk about you with others. How they talk with you about others is how they're going to talk with others about you. You meet somebody who's manipulative and lying and twisted, and then they don't do that to you, just wait 5 minutes. Like the weather in London or the weather in Melbourne. You don't like it? Just wait a few minutes. It'll change. So you can artificially be renounced. You can put on a good show. Put on your best face. Person, persona, it actually means mask. So even the very word for person originally meant your mask that you show to the world. Like Shakespeare, all the world's a stage and men are merely players, and a man in his life will wear many masks. Will play many roles. So Krishna's making a statement here that just because you don't kindle the sacred fire, just because you don't light a fire, and that means the Vedic sacrificial fire, just because you don't do your duty, not cha akriya. Akriya means no duty, without duty. But the word kriya also means Vedic ritual. And because the previous word says no fire, which means Vedic ritual, then it would also make sense to translate the next word as not merely its generic meaning, no duty, but rather doesn't do the ritual, doesn't light the fire, doesn't do the ritual. You follow? So by looking at it, I want to give you guys a little entrance into how you could read it. So you could go either way. Not one who lights no fire and performs no duty was what Prabhupada translated. Not who lights no fire and performs no ritual would be just as good. And the not doing your duty works nicely with the previous line, which says one who does their duty, one who does what needs to be done. This one says just because you don't renounce things, you don't do anything, that's not good. So you could either render it that way, or you could render it that you try to break free from the Vedic tradition, give up duty, give up adherence to ritual, and you think that makes you self-realized, but merely neglecting the Vedic ritual does not make you self-realized. It could just make you lazy. Did you follow this? So, anashrita karma palam karyan karma karoti yaha. Anashrita karma palam karyam karma karoti yaha sasannyasi cha yogi cha nir agnir nacha akriya. This is one who is unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as he's obliged is in the renounced order of life, and he is the true mystic, not he who lights no fire and performs no duty. Prabhupada's translation is quite poetic. The Sanskrit's quite poetic, right? The invocation of the Vedic sacrifice and the fire and the play on the alliteration and also the multiple word meanings. Managing to use the word karma, karyam, karma, karoti, akriya. 5 times use the same verbal root. Right? It's pretty good. So the verse in Sanskrit is quite poetic, both in terms of its meaning and use of metaphor and simile and analogy and poetic devices and also alliteration. And the translation is also quite, not he who lights no fire and performs no duty. It rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? It's smooth, right? So that's cool when sometimes you just translate literally, it's not as smooth. And sometimes another way you could translate it, you just try to communicate the meaning without being literal. And then you can use the poeticisms and the devices of another language in order to give the same feel. That makes sense? So, this is an interesting verse, and we'll get into why. That verse is particularly interesting. It's really interesting that that verse shows up at the beginning of this chapter. And I'm going to ask you guys, why is that first verse interesting? And you're going to tell me later. But we got to do a few more verses to appreciate why that verse is interesting. Yam sannyasam iti prahur yogam tam vidhi pandava. Know that it is said that it is yoga when there is renunciation. Know that it is said that what is called sin. I'm sorry, I missed it. Let me read it again. Know that what is called sannyas, that is yoga. Know that that which is called sannyas, that is yoga. So this means that sannyas and yoga are the same. Sannyas is a mental renunciation. And if you think it's merely a physical renunciation, you've missed it. Keep in mind that what we're discussing here is whether or not you should become a Buddhist monk and just leave the world and go to a monastery and go to a cave and completely check out. And the Gita is strongly at odds with that. And strongly favors an active, participatory, but still transcendental lifestyle, where you show up, you participate, but not so much so. No basketball. But not so much so that you get attached. But not so little that you become derelict in doing your duty. Yam sannyasam iti prahur yogam tam vidhi pandava. That which is called sannyas, know that to be yoga. Nahi asanyasta sankalpa yogi bhavati kaschana. This is a rhetorical question. Anyone is a yogi? Anyone becomes a yogi without renouncing desire? Without renouncing their resolve, desire? I think desire is a winner here. Sankalpa can be many things, but kalpa means the thought, imagination. Sankalpa, full thought, resolve, determination, purpose. But I think desire here is the proper way to consider it. Without renouncing desire, anyone becomes a yogi? What's being said here is that without renouncing desire, no one becomes a yogi. And so the renunciation that's required to be a yogi is not a physical renunciation necessarily. Rather, it's a mental renunciation of your attachment. We appreciate this Zen mindset. If you meet an Olympic athlete and they win the gold and then they go, oh yeah, we killed them, we're the best, we're always going to be the best, you know that they're going to cry when they lose. But then sometimes you meet a gold medalist and they're like, yeah, way to go, camp. Yeah, we trained good. Yeah, I had some good coaches. Yeah, it went our way this time. Yeah, we're confident. And you're thinking, this person's formidable. Whether they win or lose isn't going to shake them. They're going to be around for a while. They've got that champion mindset. Where even they lose, they come back. And when they win, they don't embrace it so much, and they become so, they're back, they put the nose back to the grindstone. They don't get high on their own supply. They don't get too taken away by their successes. That then sets them up to not have the resolve to stick through it when things are difficult. You follow? When somebody's too full of themselves, we almost want them to fall. Teach them a little humility, isn't it? Everybody loves a good underdog story. Right? I remember when Conor McGregor became the first double champ of the world, of the UFC, I believe, simultaneously double champ. Not other people had won two weight classes, but he won both at the same time. He had his two belts on. And he said, I've spoken a lot of bad words and I've criticized a lot of people. And now that I've got the double championship, I just wanted to apologize to absolutely nobody. He went on to glorify himself a little more and then jumped on the top of the cage with both his belts on. And a few years later, I believe that was 2015, then a few years later he broke his leg he kicked. I think he broke his leg checking. No, he broke his leg kicking. He kicked, and then Dustin Poirier checked his kick, and he broke his leg. And he was just sitting there, just a miserable soul in the ring, cussing out Poirier and insulting his wife. And he looked so petty at that moment. Such a petty little leprechaun. And you see, he was just too full of himself. Okay, it's going to come, It's going to happen. That dispassion, that resolve to do your duty, not getting high on your fame and fortune, nose to the grindstone, doing the right thing for the right reason. It's powerful. It's scary. Those guys win everything. And sustainably. What's called renunciation, you should know to be the same as yoga, or linking oneself with the Supreme. For one can never become a yogi unless he renounces the desire for sense gratification. So these two verses, are very significant that they're occurring at the beginning of this chapter. This is extremely repetitious. We literally just treated sannyas and yoga in the 5th chapter elaborately. Over 7 verses, and arguably over the whole chapter. And now Krishna starts again the 6th chapter with the same exact theme. Now we got the same theme 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th chapter. It's like getting repetitious. Sannyasa and yoga were literally the subject matter of the 5th chapter. Arjuna said, what's better, sannyasa or yoga? And now, but Krishna won't shut up about it. He already just thoroughly answered the question. And he's just repeating himself again in the 6th chapter. And there's a reason why. I think there's a reason why. And I think this next verse should explain it to you. The next verse. Rurukshor muner yogam. Arurukshor muner yogam karma karanam uchate. Aruruksho. Of those who desire to ascend to yoga. Of those munis, of those sages who desire to achieve yoga. Karma karanam uchate. Same alliteration. Karma karanam. Karma is the cause. Action is the cause. Of those who desire to achieve yoga, action is the cause. Yoga arudhasya tasyaiva shama karanam uchate. Of those who have already achieved yoga, who have already risen up and achieved yoga, for them, shama is the cause. For them, shama is the cause. Shama means quietude, tranquility, peace. Shama. For those who wish to achieve yoga, karma or action is the cause. For those who have already achieved yoga, shama, quietude, peace, renunciation is the cause. Does that sentence make sense? It does not. It doesn't not make sense because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense because it contradicts everything that's been said in the Gita for the last 5 chapters. Practically. There's been a couple verses like this throughout the previous verses. There was a verse, if you're self-satisfied, then for you there's no duty. You have nothing to gain by doing your duty, nothing to lose by not doing your duty. That verse was there in the 3rd chapter. So there are some verses in the Gita that speak favorably about renouncing the world. And this is one of them. And now we've got that if you want to achieve yoga, you got to do your duty. Once you've achieved yoga, you then have to just be tranquil and peaceful and arguably give up your duty. Do you follow that? Now there's different ways you can interpret this verse. You can interpret it that, okay, you should do your duty to be attached and then you'll get yoga, and then you do your duty without being attached once you have yoga. But that doesn't work because the path to achieving yoga is the path of detached action. Krishna never recommended attached action as being his choice. He gave validity to yajna, but he never said you should just, you're going to achieve yoga by being attached. You have to give up your attachment. And he just told you that. So that doesn't make sense. So now you've got detached action, which is real sannyas, will help you achieve yoga. And once you have yoga, then you should just be peaceful and quiet and tranquil. Now you could say, okay, well then you practice detached action and that detached action becomes more normal or more your bread and butter or more your daily fare. You could argue that. The problem with arguing that, let me say that again, listen carefully. It's not subtle. It's not like the stuff that we're discussing here is subtle, but it is precise, such that you need to pay attention. I could argue, yeah, the way you achieve yoga is by doing your duty and being unattached. But then once you achieve yoga, you'll then be profoundly unattached. And one was a sadhana or a practice where you're practicing being detached. And then once you've achieved yoga, you'll just become fully detached on a much higher level. And you could argue that that's the meaning of shama. Do you guys follow that? Do you follow that? The reason why that doesn't work, in my opinion, although I do think it works, I'm not hating on that understanding. The reason why I don't like that understanding of the verse is because the chapter will go on to promote a lifestyle where you live alone, where you do meditation in the forest, where you don't talk to people, and where you perform the typical duties of a sannyasi, yogi, sage, going to the forest and meditating. Traditional yoga sadhana is recommended here. Finding yourself a seat that's not too high or not too low so you don't fall off it. Not too high, and when you're in meditation, you'll fall off it. Not too low where you get bothered by insects or whatever. A seat of an animal skin, which is, insects and stuff don't crawl on animal skins. And then also covered by some cotton, so it's a little softer, and then a white cloth on top of it. I think it might be some cotton stuffing, and then the skin, and then the white cloth on top of it. It's a traditional yogi seat. And, not too high, not too low. You look at the tip of your nose. What was beginning to be described in the last chapter. And you meditate and practice and control your mind from all sides, and are attached to your family, and don't eat too much, don't eat too little, don't sleep too much, don't sleep too little. Perform breathing exercises, hold your mind steady like a lamp in a windless place, the flame of a lamp in a windless place. And the description there is very similar to a description of what you might expect from a traditional sannyasi, renunciate, ascetic in any religion. Therefore, I believe that this chapter, because of those verses that describe a traditional yoga sadhana, which would involve renouncing the world, I believe this chapter is acknowledging that there's an exception. Although most people need to do their duty, that there might be some people at a certain stage of their practice where they can renounce the world. Certainly at the end of life you renounce your duty, or your duty changes as you become an old person. Your duty changes. You retire, so on and so forth. There might be some people who, just given their nature, they're very unlusty, ungreedy, unangry, and this kind of a lifestyle works for them. Certainly sannyasis existed in the Vedic tradition, as did shramans and Kaishans and avaduts. There were these different types of anti-establishment personalities who were accepted as self-realized in the Vedic culture, but who did not participate in the Vedic culture per se. They lived on the periphery. They would renounce, ritual. And the Gita explains that all these different personalities, all these different categories, or all these different paths ultimately lead to Krishna bhakti, ultimately lead to devotion, ultimately lead to loving Krishna. And so while surveying the spiritual landscape of ancient India, Krishna touches on any number of different disciplines and traditions and explains how they can all be viewed in the light of Krishna bhakti. They all lead to Krishna bhakti. And so I do think what we're finding here is an unusual caveat, exception to the rule, cut out, alternative. That either A, once you achieve yoga, then you become beyond duty. Alternatively, there is a type of person who, at a certain level of spiritual advancement, the way to make it to the next level is to renounce the world. And therefore, the first two verses are significant because they reiterate Krishna's teaching all throughout the Gita before introducing an alternative. And really, there's no difference. You're still doing battle with your mind. You're still trying to renounce desires. But it does appear that like at a certain stage, either for certain types of people or for somebody at a certain stage of development or in certain scenarios, this possibility of a more traditional renunciation of the world may be acceptable to the Gita, may be acceptable to Krishna. Did you guys follow that? Let's read one more. Or maybe two more. For one who's a neophyte in the Eightfold Yoga system, work is said to be the means. And for one who's already elevated in yoga, cessation of all material activities is said to be the means. There you go, right? Prabhupada just hits it, right? A person is said to be elevated in yoga when, having renounced all material desires, he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in furtive activities. So that's the person who gets to cease all activities. Yoga arudha uchate. At this time it is said that he has achieved yoga. When? Sarva sankalpa sannyasi. He has renounced all desires. Na karmasu anusajate. He is not attached to his work. Yada. When he nendriyarteshu na karmashu anusajate. When someone is not attached to the object of the senses, not attached to their work for sense gratification, not attached to fulfilling the purposes of the senses through their work. Not attached to working for the enjoyment of the senses. I like that one. And has renounced all desires. That person's said to achieve yoga. And when that person's achieved yoga, what are they told to do? Shama karanam uchate. Shama is the means, which means quietude and tranquility. Shamatha is very popular in Buddhism. You guys all heard of Vipassana? Vipassana is kind of a moving meditation in Buddhism. It was made very, very popular in the 60s and 70s. Up until now, they teach retreats in Vipassana all over the world. And there's a little counting, a little movement involving meditation. And the other major school of thought was called Shamatha. In the beginning, earliest stage of Buddhism, these were just different practices. Dhyan was also there. Meditation, there were 3 different practices which were all done by the bhikshu, by the Buddhist renunciate. But then eventually, some centuries later, they got separated into different schools. And so Vipassana is a corruption of the Sanskrit term Vipassana, which means insight. A meditation which gives you insight, as opposed to Shamatha. Shamatha would be like just becoming absolutely still and quiet without a moving meditation to anchor yourself to. And so this Vipassana is usually considered to be the easier form, the more easy to enter into, which is why it's become popularized. But Shamatha is this other Buddhist meditation where you become very still and very impervious to the material world. The same root, Shamatha. Shamakaranam uchate. And then the last verse. Udhared atmanatmanam natmanam avasadayat. Atmaiva hi atmano bandhur atmaiva ripur atmanaha. So you guys see what's going on there? What's going on there? That's right. Udharet atmanatmanam na atmanam avasadayet. Atmayava hi atmano bandhur atmayava ripur atmanaha. So that's atmanatmanam na atmanam atmayava atmana atmayava atmana. 7 times the word atma gets used in one verse. One should uplift oneself. One should uplift one's atma by the atma. One should not degrade oneself. One should not degrade the atma. The atma is the friend of the atma, and the atma is the enemy of the atma. One should uplift one's atma by the atma and not degrade one's atma. The atma is the friend of the atma. The atma is also the enemy of the atma. So obviously the word atma here, which can mean self, oneself. Not self with a capital S like your concept of self. No, like oneself, myself, oneself. So then if we were to translate it that way, which is what the word atma means in Sanskrit, one should uplift oneself by oneself and not degrade oneself. Oneself is the friend to oneself, and oneself is also the enemy to oneself. Okay? It doesn't quite convey the meaning, so you got to kind of play with it a little bit. So atma could mean oneself. It could also mean the self, the soul. It could also mean the mind. So one should uplift oneself by the mind and not degrade oneself with the mind. The mind is the friend of the self, but the mind can also be the enemy of the self. So by playing with the meaning of the word atma, all of a sudden the meaning of the verse becomes extremely clear. You follow that? One must deliver himself. Yeah, udhara means to deliver. It also means to uplift. Ut means to up, but udhara means also to deliver. One must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. See that? Himself, mind, himself. See that? The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. Nice translation. One must deliver himself with the help of his mind and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well. It flows, right? So Prabhupada again matches that poeticism a little bit, that fluidity, that niceness. But wow, what a great verse, right? What a cool verse. And so this point is that when you're sitting in meditation, right? What's your enemy? Your mind. Yeah. Not yourself. Your mind. You follow? What's your enemy? There you go. Right. And so now that Krishna is beginning to speak about this more mental game, this renounced practice, then he's starting to talk about the mind, because that's your major battleground. Once you've conquered the doing your duty and you've gotten to a place where you're now going to renounce the world a bit, either because of age, because of circumstance, because of your nature, or even if while doing your duty, you're still doing your duty, eventually you're going to have to contend with your mind as well. It's not that that's not there, but especially in a meditational practice, your mind is, and this chapter is traditionally called dhyana yoga, the yoga of meditation. Also Buddhist practice. Dhyana is also. I mentioned those 3 schools, shamatha, dhyana, and vipassana. So this verse sets out the battleground a little bit. And we're now going to roll into a more traditional cave-dwelling renunciation type practice. But it's also going to lead to devotion. And we're not going to hear a bunch of verses about do your duty for the rest of the chapter. Krishna is going to, move beyond that because, again, I said this chapter is kind of an alternative. It's a tangent off of that. And that's why Krishna brought up at the beginning of the chapter to just encode that, hey, this is my teaching, but all right, we can go and we can treat this one as well. All right, this exists. You follow? Like you could imagine, they say if you are your own lawyer, then you have a fool for a client. I mean, only a fool acts as their own lawyer. And so if you want to be your own lawyer, the judge will tell you, no, let's get you a public defender. And if you're like, nope, they're like, are you sure? And then if you want to represent yourself, they're going to go, okay, here's what you need to do. And they'll give you some instructions on how to represent yourself. But their go-to will be to say to you, no, do not do this. So Krishna's done that in this chapter. And now he's going to treat the subject because there could be a circumstance where this is what you want to do. Where it's appropriate. And this already exists in the Vedic culture, so it's almost like Krishna has to treat it anyway to have a complete teaching, because he has to deal with the fact that such people exist. And at some stage of your life, maybe when you're old, at some stage of your life, maybe if you were born in a particularly pious family, at some stage in your life you really just have no desire to get married, no desire to participate in the world. We have devotees like this, especially Indian devotees like this, where they don't get into politics, there's no trippiness, they just are not interested in the material world very much. And they live in our scriptures, and they live in a very simple, beautiful, not simple, they live in a very beautiful, elegant, idealized world of Shastra and philosophy, and they don't need money. They don't need a big following. They don't need anything. They just do their thing. They're sadhus. Or super renounced, not for a minute, but for a lifetime. And that's just the life they lead, and it works for them. So such people are also accommodated in the Gita. So the first two verses are a reminder, hey, this is my main teaching, and then we get this tangent, this red herring, this unusual verse out of nowhere, introducing Shama as an option, as a cause, once you're at a certain level. Then we're told what that level is, okay? And then we're told what the game is now. It's you dealing with your mind. Thoughts? Yeah.
I really found this chapter so far to be at first contradictory, but then super interesting, because I wouldn't have got what you pointed out about what Krishna's doing now. Even though I started to think about it, you talked about he likes to have a synthesis that sampradaya, is that the right word?
Samanvaya?
Samanvaya, yeah. So like...
What'd you call it?
Sampradaya. Samanvaya. So in the last chapter,
A harmonization.
Yeah.
A perfect conclusion. A perfect flow. Samanvaya means like it's laid out perfectly in order. Like it fits together all nicely, harmonically.
What is what I said mean?
Sampradaya means a formal tradition that you belong to. Your party.
Okay.
It's all good.
But at the end of the last chapter, sannyas and yoga were very distinct, and even favored one over the other. But now it's like he's thought of all the.
Now he's favoring
And
sannyas.
it's like, wait, okay, I don't want to push you out of the way, and even like I don't have to feel neglected by this chapter, even if I chose yoga, because it shows that I might have to face this one day. And still.
Yeah, right. So whether you are at some point, maybe when you're a little older, you're going to have to give up some duties that you were attached to, simply because of age. That happens. Your dharma is going to change. At some point, that meditation game might be more the game that you play even you're still doing your duty, at some point you're going to have to do battle with the mind. Once you get the body on track, then the mind becomes your next. And even by being unattached to the fruits, that's a massive battle. But this indicates there's more battles ahead. To keep the mind focused all the time. It's one thing to focus on not being attached to the results of your duty. It's another thing to focus on being fully renounced and beyond duality, beyond pleasure and pain, heat and cold, happiness and distress, friends and foes. And so that's already been alluded to all throughout the chapter, but this is a sadhana where that's primarily what you're doing, is working through that stuff. As opposed to working on doing your duty and working on that stuff, this is where the mainstay of your practice becomes a quiet, personal, meditative practice. More? Yeah.
Are you able to reach full renunciation if you always stay in the Grihastha path?
I certainly don't think you have to throw your wife and children away to achieve self-realization. You will have to let them go completely when you die. And so if you're going to do that, you're probably going to have to do that beforehand. Because the idea that you're going to be attached to your family right up until the end, and then all of a sudden you're going to become renounced, doesn't make a lot of sense. So irrespective of whether you live with your family or not, you're going to have to give up your attachment to them. And so sannyas is on everybody's menu. I mean, sannyas is nothing compared to what death is. Death means you have to renounce your own body. You have to renounce breathing. You have to renounce your heart beating. So renunciation is on everybody's menu, and extreme renunciation. And so you're going to have to get over your wife and your kids, whether you do that while still officially married or whether you formally, consciously uncouple and become a renunciate. That's another conversation. I do not think that if you don't divorce or consciously uncouple from your spouse, you're doomed to not achieve self-realization. I remember Prabhupada said, I think one place in the Bhagavad, Prabhupada said, Grihasthas, only a quarter of the Grihasthas go back to the spiritual world. And one of my teachers who is married, he said, he read that, he was like, hey, I'll take those odds. Like, those are good odds. So, a sannyasi would be like, oh, but we are 100% going back. But he probably didn't say that. It's not there in that verse. It says 1/4. So who knows? Your numbers might be lower than ours. For most of us, we need to get married, have a family. It's therapeutic. It's healthy for us. We should do that. At some point, your wife's going to get ugly and haggard. You're going to get decrepit and old, weak. And everybody's going to have to get over it. And so whether you do that while you're still married or whether at some point you one of my friends just called me today, and he got divorced about 10 years ago. I haven't talked to him in 10 years. And his wife left him. And Dave Amrit Swami wrote to him when they inked the papers on the divorce. He wrote in that quote, "Free at last, free at last, free at last." He said in that. I mean, Maj has a great sense of humor, and so. But yeah, I don't think that you're necessarily free at last just because you got divorced. A lot of people get divorced and just shack up again. But to answer your question, we all have to give up everything. We all have to let go of everything, including your own body. And so practicing that should be on everybody's radar. Oh, I have to get good at giving stuff up. I have to get good at letting go of the world. Does it make sense?
Just a follow-up question. Is it any different, if you're both devotees, you're both trying to, go back to Godhead? Is it the same thing? Is it any different?
No, Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, when I do kirtan in my home, my home becomes Vrindavan. My family becomes gopis. So you can have that vision. If you're supposed to view everybody as a servant of Krishna and everybody as Krishna's child, why would your family be exempted from that? But a lot of times, the standard Vedic course is that you are alone, you get married, then you and your wife become monks together, and then you separate. 4 orders. You're a student, you get married, you and your wife renounce the world together, and then you leave each other. And so sannyas is that 4th order. That's the traditional model. More? Yeah.
I just want to quickly appreciate you pointing out all of the alliteration and double meanings for the words and how expertly Prabhupada can convey what's being said. The last verse we read, or maybe the second one where it was like, they said Atman like 7 times as just a
Right?
great verse.
And it's a great verse, and Prabhupada's translation is really, he used that oneself. One should not degrade himself by the mind, but uplift oneself, deliver oneself by the mind. The mind is the friend of the self, of the soul, but also its enemy. And so you saw Prabhupada playing with different meanings of Atma to make the verse really make sense, to make it really, really, solid, something you can really sink your teeth into. What would otherwise be a vexing, enigmatic, koanic verse, you'd have no idea what to do with it, right? Yeah. Prabhupada was a great translator. Prabhupada wasn't like a Sanskritist, like trying to be like all perfect. He wrote his books very quick, and many of his books were just spoken by him into a microphone. And it wasn't like he didn't even edit his stuff. He just spoke it, and then gave it to the editors, and then they would turn it into a book. I mean, if I proofread my texts, right? I proofread my text. If you ever get a text from me and I make a mistake, I always read it right afterwards and then do that with a little asterisk afterwards because I proofread my text. Probably wrote whole books without proofreading it. He had a team of people he trusted, and sometimes they made mistakes. Sometimes people would get involved. They had a question. But Prabhupada would just, every day, he had a tape recorder with a microphone. He would speak and read the verses and speak his verses, and the verses and the purports, and then turn over the tapes, and they turn into a book. And so, not only the Gita, I actually think he wrote. I don't think he spoke it. It was the Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita were spoken. But you see here, Prabhupada he was very, very prolific. He worked quick. He moved fast. He got stuff done. And so sometimes there might be a word, here or there, where maybe somebody might have picked, not the best word in the world for it. He could have got out of the dictionary and found a better word. He was moving quick. Maybe he learned more English and his translation skills developed. Maybe his editors messed stuff up. I usually just blame the editor. But one of the great things Prabhupada did, and I don't, also the editors get some credit for this as well. But one of the great things Prabhupada did was he would have these really fluid, beautiful translations that are smooth, that really convey the essence of it. And it's even more amazing that he was able to do that while moving at such a quick pace. It's like watching a boxer, just, poetry in motion. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much.